Today, we'll be looking at a case from the starting era of the 19th century. So sit back as we go to USA. Mabel Young was born in 1869 in Boston and was the only child of Mr. Charles H. Young and his wife. Her father died during her early childhood, and following his death, Mabel and her mother moved into the home of her maternal grandfather, Mr. James W. Hobbs. Hobbs was widely regarded as a very respectable gentleman who, before his retirement, had worked as an importer. The family lived in an elegant house on Chester Park, one of Boston's most fashionable neighborhoods, an area long associated with wealth, refinement, and established social standing. The Hobbs family had for many years enjoyed a prominent position within the city, residing in a part of Boston known for its affluence and cultural influence. At the time, Boston was one of the major centers of education in America and was home to many prestigious institutions, including Harvard University, as well as a robust public school system that emphasized reading, writing, and religious instruction. Church played a central role in the lives of many families, and for children like Mabel, Sunday school was an important weekly ritual where biblical teachings and moral lessons were taught as part of ordinary upbringing. On the afternoon of Sunday, the 23rd of May, 1875, Mabel Young was taken by her aunt, a lady named Miss Augusta Hobbs, to the Warren Street Baptist Church for Sunday school, something that she did on most Sundays. Miss Hobbs would leave the child at the church, and while Mabel remained in class, she would either run a few errands or spend the time chatting with other members of the congregation, remaining nearby until it was time to return. The infant Sunday school class that Mabel attended followed a regular schedule, and on that afternoon, the lesson came to an end at 3:30. When the class was dismissed, Miss Hobbs returned to the church to collect her niece. Upon arriving, she entered the building and spoke briefly with the reverend, but even after the conversation, she was still unable to get any information about Mabel. Miss Hobbs returned to the church at around 3:30 in the afternoon, shortly after the infant Sunday school class had been dismissed. Upon arriving, she entered the building and spoke with the reverend, as she often did, exchanging a few words before turning her attention to finding her niece. When the conversation ended and she looked around the church, she was unable to see Mabel among the children who had just left their class. At first, Miss Hobbs assumed that the young girl was nearby, perhaps playing with a friend somewhere inside the church. She waited for a short time, expecting Mabel to reappear on her own, but as several minutes passed without any sign of her niece, her concern began to grow. Miss Hobbs called out Mabel's name and started to look through the interior of the church, checking the areas where children were known to gather. A few other ladies who were still present noticed her concern and joined in the search, moving through different parts of the building and calling out as well. Despite their efforts, there was still no trace of the child. Each room that was checked brought no result, and Mabel did not respond to any of the calls made in her name. As the search continued and the minutes passed, Miss Hobbs became increasingly frantic. What at first seemed like a brief delay now appeared more troubling, and the absence of the 5-year-old girl could no longer be explained by ordinary play or distraction. As it became clear that Mabel could not be found within the immediate area, more people inside the church became aware that something was wrong. What had begun as a quiet search led by Miss Hobbs and a few other women gradually drew the attention of additional parishioners who began to assist in looking through the building. Rooms were checked one after another, including spaces where children were sometimes allowed to wander, but each search ended the same way, with no sign of the child. The search soon extended beyond the interior rooms and into other parts of the church that were accessible at the time. Those involved moved deliberately, calling out Mabel's name as they went, listening for any response that might indicate where she had gone. Despite the growing number of people helping, there was still no trace of her anywhere within the areas they examined. The absence, which at first seemed puzzling, began to feel increasingly serious. As more minutes passed without success, the mood among those searching shifted noticeably. Voices grew louder and more urgent, and the movements of those involved became quicker and less methodical. Miss Hobbs, who had remained at the center of the search, showed visible signs of distress as each new effort failed to produce any result. Others attempted to reassure her, though they too were unsettled by the lack of any explanation for Mabel's disappearance. By this point, it was clear to everyone involved that the situation was no longer ordinary. A child who had been left safely inside the church only a short time earlier was now unaccounted for, and no one could say where she had gone or how long she had been missing. Still, there were no accusations made or no particular suspicions voiced. The atmosphere was one of concern and confusion, with those present focused solely on finding the missing child and understanding what had happened within the walls of the church. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a few people who had been outside the church reported something they had heard earlier. They said that a child had screamed and that the sound appeared to be coming from the belfry. According to those who heard it, the scream lasted only a few seconds and then stopped suddenly, after which there was no further noise. The people who reported it said that everything had gone quiet immediately afterward. This information was passed on to those inside the church who were searching for Mabel. One of the teachers, a man named Walter Sawyer, went toward the stairs that led up to the gallery. He did not go alone. The church sexton, a 28-year-old man named Thomas Piper, accompanied him as he moved upstairs. Together, the two men went up toward the gallery level and approached the door that led into the belfry. Those who remained below stayed inside the church while Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Piper continued upward. At that point, the search that had been taking place throughout the lower part of the building shifted toward the upper area that had been mentioned by the people who were outside when the sound was heard. Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Piper reached the gallery door that led to the belfry and found that it was locked. As they stood there, both men could hear faint moaning sounds coming from inside. The sounds were coming from beyond the door, and they continued while the two men remained at the entrance. Mr. Sawyer turned to Mr. Piper and asked him for the key so that the door could be opened. Mr. Piper appeared uneasy as he responded. He said that he did not know where the key was and explained that although he was the church sexton, he had not been into the belfry since the previous fall. He added that he was unsure where the key might be kept and could not say where it was stored. Mr. Piper then assured Mr. Sawyer that he would look for the key and left the gallery area. While he was gone, the sounds from the belfry continued to be heard through the locked door. After a short time, Mr. Piper returned and said that he had not been able to find the key. The door remained locked, and the moaning sounds continued to come from inside the belfry. Mr. Sawyer remained at the gallery door, listening as the sounds continued. As more time passed without access being gained, he grew increasingly impatient, aware that whatever was causing the sounds inside had not stopped and that the delay was continuing. With the sounds still coming from inside the belfry and no key available, Mr. Sawyer reached into his pocket and removed a pair of pliers. After a few moments, he used them to force the lock on the gallery door. Once the door was opened, he proceeded through and began climbing the narrow flight of stairs that led up toward the belfry. Mr. Piper remained nearby as Mr. Sawyer continued upward. When he reached the top, Mr. Sawyer opened the hatch that led into the belfry itself. As the hatch was lifted, a flock of pigeons that had been inside was startled by the intrusion and flew out past him. With the space now visible, Mr. Sawyer saw that Mabel was lying inside the belfry. Her head was covered in blood, but she was still alive. Beside her lay a baseball bat, which was smeared with both whitewash and blood. Mr. Sawyer bent down and gently lifted the child, taking care as he moved her. He then carried Mabel down the stairs and back into the body of the church. Once inside, he laid her down in the nave. Miss Hobbs and other parishioners immediately rushed to attend to her, gathering around as she was placed on the floor. By this point, the police and a doctor had already been contacted. They arrived shortly afterward and began attending to the situation, as those inside the church remained gathered nearby. Mabel was unconscious as she received medical attention inside the church. It was unclear whether she would survive the night. Mabel was unconscious as she received medical attention inside the church. It was unclear whether she would survive the night. The police arrived soon after and began their investigation immediately, seeking to understand what had taken place inside the building and how the child had been injured. As officers spoke with those who had been present, they began asking questions about the church sexton, Thomas Piper. Witnesses reported that he had often been seen lingering around the church at odd hours and that he had engaged in conversations with parishioners that some found unsettling. These accounts were given as part of the initial inquiries being made by the police. Mr. Piper was briefly questioned about his movements that afternoon. During this exchange, he stated confidently that he had not been in the belfry for the past 6 months. He maintained that he had no reason to be there and offered this explanation without hesitation. The baseball bat found beside Mabel became a central part of the investigation. Deacon George E. Norris, a regular churchgoer who lived at 360 Main Street in Charleston, informed the police that he had seen the bat earlier that morning. He said that it had been in the church library sometime between 10 and 11 o'clock. Mr. Norris explained that its presence there had struck him as unusual, prompting him to ask one of the Sunday school students why it was there and who it belonged to. The fact that the bat was later found in the belfry was noted by the officers as they continued their inquiries. As the investigation continued, the focus of the police became increasingly centered on Thomas Piper. He was already known to the authorities, having previously been a suspect in the murder of a young woman named Bridget Langren. She had been killed on the night of December 5, 1873, in the Dorchester area of Boston. Ms. Langren had been struck on the head with a heavy object, and witnesses at the time reported seeing a man climbing over a fence near the railroad tracks shortly after the attack. Although no positive identification had been made, the man's age and height were said to closely match those of Mr. Piper. He had been arrested in connection with that case, but was later released due to a lack of evidence, and by May of 1875 the murder remained unsolved. As news of the attack on Mabel Young spread, a large crowd gathered outside the church. Police officers prevented anyone from entering and continued interviewing witnesses, many of whom wished to speak about Mr. Piper. A woman identified as Mrs. Norris, the wife of the deacon, told officers that Mr. Piper often appeared troubled, as though something was weighing on him. Another parishioner, W.H. Gleason, who owned a shop at 510 Shawmut Avenue, reported that only days earlier Mr. Piper had come into his shop and sold him 6 pigeons for $2.10. When asked where the pigeons came from, Mr. Piper had replied that he raised them in the church belfry, a statement that conflicted with his claim that he had not been there since the previous fall. As officers continued speaking with church members, rumors circulated that Mr. Piper had a habit of enticing children into the church under unclear circumstances. During questioning, officers noticed bloodstains on both his collar and his handkerchief. Detective Dearborn later searched Mr. Piper's room and discovered a container holding a mixture of whiskey and liniment. Mr. Piper explained that he used it to help him sleep. He also admitted that he had spoken with Mabel that afternoon, but said that he had only asked her whether she liked Sunday school. Officers were told that the infant Sunday school class Mabel attended had been dismissed earlier than the more advanced classes. The older children were held in a room directly across from the one used by the younger group. After the students had been dismissed, witnesses reported seeing Mr. Piper standing at the doorway of the older children's classroom. One man who approached him later recalled that Mr. Piper appeared startled and asked whether the seats were satisfactory, a question that seemed unusual given that he rarely visited the room and had no responsibility for the class. For several minutes following this encounter, Mr. Piper's whereabouts could not be accounted for. Based on the information gathered, he was arrested and placed in a cell in the basement of City Hall as the police continued their inquiries. Later that evening, at 7:40 p.m., Mabel Young died from her injuries without ever regaining consciousness. News of her death spread quickly and intensified the public response to the case. When officers informed Mr. Piper that the child had died, his behavior changed. He became agitated, retreated to the corner of his cell, and his previously cooperative manner gave way to evasive and unhelpful answers. Chief Edward Savage, now convinced that the evidence warranted further action, ordered an immediate inquest into Mabel Young's death. During the inquest, witnesses testified that the baseball bat had been seen earlier that day behind the library door. Officers also stated that when Mr. Piper was arrested, he was found to be carrying 2 sets of keys that opened 14 doors within the church, including the door to the belfry. A boy reported seeing a man jump from the belfry and run away. Florence Lilland told the court that Mr. Piper had previously invited her to the belfry to see the pigeons, and the daughter of Reverend William Rise said she was afraid of him. Other parents described similar complaints. On Tuesday, the 8th of June, 1875, the inquest concluded that 5-year-old Mabel Young had been murdered by Thomas Piper. The trial of Thomas Piper began on Monday, the 6th of December, 1875, and quickly drew widespread attention from both the press and the public. Newspapers covered the proceedings closely, and the case became a subject of intense discussion throughout the city. During the trial, Mr. Piper showed no outward signs of nervousness and appeared calm and unfazed as the evidence was presented against him. On the third day of proceedings, the prosecution prepared to call around a dozen young girls who were ready to testify that Mr. Piper had invited them into the belfry on multiple occasions. After objections were raised by the defense, the judge ruled that their testimony would be inadmissible. Much of the remaining case relied on circumstantial evidence, which was presented in detail to the jury. Dr. Joshua Treadwell testified that he had examined a single light-colored hair found on Mr. Piper's coat and compared it to 50 hairs taken from Mabel Young's head. He stated that the hair found on the coat once belonged to Mabel, and also confirmed that there were bloodstains on various parts of Mr. Piper's clothing. Further testimony came from William Barry and Frederick Glover, who said that between 3:30 and 4 o'clock on the afternoon of May the 23rd, they had seen a man they identified as Mr. Piper jump from a window in the belfry of the Warren Avenue Baptist Church and run toward the rear of the building. Mr. Glover added that Mr. Piper was not wearing a hat and stumbled as he ran. During cross-examination, Mr. Glover admitted that he had previously been convicted of forgery and served time in prison. Witnesses were only allowed in the courtroom during their own testimony to ensure impartiality. After 9 days, the trial concluded. Mr. Avery, representing the defense, argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial and drew attention to Mr. Glover's behavior on the day of the crime, including his disposal of clothing and the tearing out of coat pockets. He emphasized that only 3 minutes of Mr. Piper's time were unaccounted for, and suggested that the child may have been injured by a falling object. The jury deliberated for 20 hours and returned saying that they were unable to agree on a verdict, with 9 jurors favoring conviction and 3 acquittal. A second trial began on the 31st of January, 1876. Mr. Piper addressed the jury in a humble and courteous manner, maintaining his innocence. On Tuesday, the 8th of February, 1876, he was found guilty of the murder of Mabel Young and was sentenced to death. An appeal was filed, but later denied. Afterward, Mr. Piper offered an account claiming that Mabel had been accidentally struck by a bat used to prop open a window, a version of events that failed to alter the outcome of the case. Approximately 2 weeks before his scheduled execution, Thomas Piper made a confession. He admitted to the murder of 5-year-old Mabel Young and also disclosed his involvement in other violent crimes that had taken place in the years prior. Piper stated that he had murdered Bridget Langren on the night of December 5, 1873, a crime for which he had previously been suspected but never charged. He also confessed to attacking Mary Tyner in 1874. Tyner was a prostitute who sustained serious injuries after Piper struck her multiple times with a hammer-like object. Although she survived the assault, she was unable to identify her attacker and was later confined to a lunatic asylum where she spent the remainder of her life. Piper further admitted to assaulting a young woman named Minnie Sullivan on December 29, 1871. He said that he struck her with a blunt object but fled when her screams drew attention. Miss Sullivan survived the attack and eventually recovered, though no one had ever been charged. Despite the seriousness of these admissions, there was insufficient evidence to bring additional charges against him. On the 26th of May, 1876, Thomas Piper was executed by hanging. He was put to death alongside another condemned man, Samuel J. Frost, who was known as the Peterson murderer. After his execution, Piper was privately buried at Mount Hope Cemetery. Before his death, he requested that his written confessions remain private. Sheriff John Clark agreed, reasoning that releasing them would only further distress the community and the families affected. Thank you for listening. If you have thoughts on this case, you're welcome to share them in the comments. And if you value careful, forgotten historical documentaries like this, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.